So today we took a step aside from graphs and we looked at the equations of quadratics, and our equations were in standard form, which remember standard form is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. It's very important to remember where these pieces are, that a is the number in front of x squared, b is the number in front of x, and c is the number that is by itself. So I have the equation y equals x squared minus 10x minus 15. So the first thing, the easiest thing to find is to find my y-intercept, because my y-intercept is whatever doesn't have x with it, which in this case is negative 15. So my y-intercept is the ordered pair 0, negative 15. Now, the other thing that's easy to identify is my domain, because my domain is going to be negative infinity is less than x, which is less than infinity. That means if I were to graph this, when I graph this, it's a parabola, and it would just continue to get wider and wider and wider and wider and wider and wider, and it would never stop growing wider. The rest of these, the axis of symmetry, vertex, max or min, and range, we have to find by using the vertex formula or the axis of symmetry formula, which is the formula x equals negative b over 2a. So I need to identify what a and b are. Remember, a is the number in front of x squared, b is the number in front of x, c is always the number by itself, which we already know is our y-intercept. It is negative 15. So that means a in this problem is 1, because there is no number in front of x squared. So remember that this negative sign that's here in front of b means the opposite of b. Well, b is negative 10, so the opposite of negative 10 would be positive 10. So this really means x equals 10 divided by 2, because this 2 is always there. This 2 in the denominator is always in the denominator, times whatever a is. Well, a in this case is 1. So that would be 10 divided by 2. And 10 divided by 2 is 5. So this gives me a couple things. The first thing it gives me is my axis of symmetry, is x equals 5. The second thing that it gives me is it gives me half of my vertex. My vertex is an ordered pair, and it gives me the x value of my vertex. So I have found out three things right now. I have two things, I'm sorry. I have figured out what my axis of symmetry is by using this formula, and I have figured out half of my vertex. So now I've got to find the other half of the vertex. To find that, I take my equation, which says x squared minus 10x minus 15. So I've taken this equation, but notice instead of putting x in here, I've just put parentheses where x should be. And now I'm going to plug in what we already found out x was, which is 5. And then all I have to do is do some math to figure it out. Well, 5 squared is 25. 10 times 5 is 50 minus 15. So 25 minus 50 is negative 25 minus 15 is negative 40. So the other thing I have now found is I have found the other half of my vertex. So the negative 40 I got because I plugged in my 5, which was my x value, into my formula, and I got out negative 40. So now I have my vertex of 5, negative 40. That also tells me my max or min is going to be negative 40, and my range is going to have something to do with y and negative 40. We just have to decide what the rest of it is, if it's greater than negative 40 or less than negative 40. So if you'll recall, when I have this value here, a, whether it's positive or negative, that tells me if my graph opens up or down. Well, a in this case is 1, it's positive. That means that if I were to graph this parabola x squared minus 10x minus 15, it's going to open up. Well, the reason that helps me is because that tells me that my vertex, which is down here, is a minimum value. It also tells me that my range is y's that are greater than or equal to negative 40. So our next problem is y equals x squared plus 8x plus 5. Remember that our y-intercept is always the last number, which is 5, and that's always the easiest thing to identify. So 0, 5. My domain is always without fail in all of our equations. Negative infinity is less than x, which is less than infinity. So to find all the rest of this, I have to use my formula, which says that to find the x value of my axis of symmetry and my vertex, I use the formula negative b over 2a. So I need to identify a, b, and c. Well, a is the number in front of x squared, which would be 1. B is the number in front of x. C is the number by itself, which is 5. So I'm going to plug those in. So x equals, it says negative b, which is the opposite of b. So b is positive 8, which means it's going to be negative 8, divided by 2 times a, which is 1. So that's really negative 8 divided by 2, and negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. So I know two things. I know my axis of symmetry is x equals negative 4, and I know that half of my vertex is negative 4 something. We'll have to figure out the rest of that. To figure out the rest of it, I take my formula, which says x squared plus 8x plus 5, and instead of x, I'm going to plug in what we figured out x was in this problem, which in this case is negative 4, sorry. So I'm going to plug in negative 4 for x. So negative 4 squared is 16. 8 times negative 4 is negative 32. And then I have plus 5. Well, 16 minus 32 is negative 16. Plus 5 is going to be negative 11. So that is going to give me the y value of my vertex. So y is going to be negative 11. That also tells me that my max or min is negative 11, and my range is something to do with y and negative 11. So if I look at my equation, it says 1x squared plus 8x plus 5. Since that 1 is positive, my graph is going to open up, which means that my vertex is the minimum because it is the lowest point on the graph. And it means that my range is y's that are greater than or equal to negative 11. So just to do the math, I have 2 squared. I take care of exponents first. That's really negative 4 times 4. And then 16 times 2 would be 32 minus 18. Negative 4 times 4 is negative 16. So negative 16 plus 32 minus 18. Negative 16 plus 32 is going to be positive 16, and 16 minus 18 is going to give me negative 2. So I have now determined what the y value of my vertex is. So I know y equals negative 2. I also know that my max or min is going to be negative 2, and my range has something to do with negative 2. So going back to my standard form, my negative 4x squared plus 16x minus 18. This negative 4 tells me that my quadratic, my graph, my parabola is going to open down, which means the vertex is going to be at the top of the graph. So because my vertex is at the top, that means it is the maximum, and my range is going to be y's that are less than or equal to -2.